Chapter 605, The Demon King of Destruction 4. Bonus image. You all go to the heart, Eugene said as he rapidly closed the distance and blocked the advancing destruction. Crack. A burst of dark power vaporized along with his flames right before him. Eugene glanced at the tips of his hair turning to ash as he took half a step back. I'll keep this bastard here, he said. No longer could he sense vermouth in the Demon King of Destruction standing before him. Its eyes were as unfocused as before, and instead of flames, its entire body was enveloped in a vibrant color and dark power. By yourself? Sienna asked. She was about to join him but paused. Not alone. Anise and Christina are with me, Eugene replied, pushing his divine sword forward. As if to prove his words, his wings emitted a brilliant light. Roar. The light quickly turned into a baptism of fire that engulfed destruction. However, destruction was not consumed by the flames. Instead, it repelled them with its dark power and swirling color. Understood, Sienna said as she nodded without hesitation. Eugene had fought and defeated the specter in the past after it had become the incarnation of destruction. But what they faced now was beyond any incarnation. The entity controlling Vermouth's body was a fragment, or perhaps even the Demon King of Destruction itself. It was on a different level compared to the specter. Could Eugene really stop it alone? There was no need to consider whether that was possible. It was Eugene's decision to make. His divinity, which was linked with victory, didn't play a role in this decision. There was a simple reason why Eugene or Hamel was acting this way. Because he's never beaten Vermouth, Sienna thought to herself. With a shake of her head, she turned around. Unlike Sienna, who had paused momentarily, Molen had not stopped at all. As always, he charged forward without hesitation. Craw! With a war cry, Molen raised his axe. However, the heart of destruction did not remain silent either. With a crackling sound, the surface of the heart broke, split, and opened. Dark power flowed out from within and surged toward Molen. Molen's axe fell. The large blade cut through the mass of dark power, but at the same moment, an explosion of color engulfed Molen. Just then Sienna cast a spell with a deep sigh. The space between them was severed, and as if it had always been so, Molen was transported next to Sienna. Stupid bastard. Don't go off alone. Sienna chided. Sienna, I trusted you, Molen answered simply. Sienna could no longer reproach him after hearing his response. She knew from Molen's character that his words weren't mere flattery. He had sincerely believed that Sienna would assist him when he charged. All right, I get it, so just don't go charging in alone. We need to see what to do about that first, Sienna said, gesturing to Destruction's heart. Sienna sighed again and narrowed her eyes. The surface of the heart continued to wriggle. The mess of bones and flesh continued to unfold. Inside, purple and dark red flesh writhed like rotten meat, with dark power and swirling colors flowing within instead of blood. How disgusting, Sienna commented. She had seen countless rotting corpses before. Her stomach was steeled to the point where she could have tea amidst such grotesque scenes without feeling sick. Yet the sight of that heart made her insides churn and flip. It was certainly repulsive to the eye, but it was also the effect of the dark power and colors emanating from the heart. What accumulated and congealed inside was far more noxious and dreadful than any poison the Demon King of Incarceration had ever concocted. How long can I last? Sienna wondered. Sienna chewed her lip as she held back her nausea. Her divine power had grown significantly stronger after the battle a week ago. Her resistance to dark power had increased as well, though she was not completely immune. Boom! A loud explosion behind her interrupted Sienna's worrisome thoughts. There was no time to think. Molen, she called out. After brief contemplation, she made the same decision as 300 years ago. When they faced an unknown enemy in a situation with no clear answers, it was always Molen who charged first. Go ahead, she said. I knew you would say that, Molen said with a grin. He leaped forward. Sienna watched how he confronted the heart and how it would resist. She glanced back briefly, but a mere glance was insufficient for her to comprehend the situation. All she could see was a chaotic intermingling of light and colors. Of course, Eugene did not want to fight Vermouth this way. Someday he wanted a proper duel with Vermouth to finally determine who was stronger, but certainly not today. It was something he yearned for after everything was over. It was something to be had in a peaceful routine where they wouldn't have to think about destruction or demon kings, without any grand resolutions or beliefs after their victory. And after his victory, if Vermouth were feeling defeated and down, Eugene would tap him on the shoulder a few times after the fight. Though Eugene seriously doubted that he would actually react that way. More likely than not, he would say something typical of a victor like, "You will become stronger one day," and then go for a drink together. But not today, Eugene said with a chuckle as he wiped the blood from his lips. He didn't consider his current opponent to be Vermouth. Ultimately, the excuse that he had given that he had never beaten Vermouth before was just a way to steel himself. "Strictly speaking, it's not even a one-on-one, right?" Eugene said. "Technically, Hamel, there are 3 of us on our side," Anise answered. "But sister, I don't think Sir Eugene is being unfair. The opponent is evil, has lived as long as the Demon King of Incarceration, and must be thoroughly defeated," Christina countered. Unlike Anise, who playfully teased Eugene, Christina defended him earnestly. "My goodness, Christina. With your current reasoning, even if Hamel were to defecate in the street, you would be able to give a reasoning for it and explain it to everyone," Anise said sarcastically. "Sir Eugene would never do such a thing," Christina retorted. "Why would I shit?" Eugene questioned as well. Boom. An explosion a short distance in front of him made Eugene's hair flutter. He steadied his breath and reached out. The light flowing from his chest instantly created an eclipse. "And it's not the 3 of us," he said. Eclipse was launched into the center of the explosion. The spreading force was all sucked into Eclipse, which then exploded again. This explosion shook the void with a force many times greater than the previous ones. Destruction raised a sword nearby. It was holding a sword, one that was eerily similar to the one Eugene knew. The Moonlight Sword. The Moonlight Sword was created by Vermouth by drawing out his dark power after splitting off from Destruction. Thus, there was no reason for the Demon King of Destruction to wield the Moonlight Sword. Yet since earlier Vermouth had been crafting and wielding it in battle. Despite lacking sentience, its attacks weren't awkward either. Earlier, Destruction had only known simple attacks using its arms or manipulating magical power and color, but now that was no longer the case. As the clashes continued, its movements evolved. Destruction disappeared from Eugene's view, having sliced through Eclipse's explosion. It hadn't done that before, or rather it couldn't. But Destruction had adapted and evolved. For several moves now, Destruction had been moving that way and actively using it to attack Eugene. This was the belly of Destruction. Vermouth was born here and he could move anywhere he wanted, just like now. Though Eugene couldn't see it directly, his instincts honed from his divinity compelled him to move. The Moonlight Sword strike slashed through the air where Eugene's head had been just now. He dodged the strike. But the attack wasn't over. The colors drawn in the air writhed and exploded in all directions. Eugene couldn't utilize prominence to leap through space here. Thus, he retreated, dodging the spreading colors, and drew his sword. "I'm certain," Eugene thought to himself. The current attacks were sharper than the previous ones. Without his instincts, dodging Destruction's strikes would have been difficult. It was getting used to its method of movement and adding attacks to complement its movement technique. How could that be when it had no sentience? "It's evolving," Eugene concluded. There was no other explanation. The Demon King of Destruction was using Vermouth, the vessel, to grow explosively. The original combat techniques Vermouth knew were being used against Eugene. Destruction was responding to Eugene's strikes in ways that Vermouth would typically utilize. Eugene growled. He confirmed his suspicion. Destruction flailed around while looking at him. Once more, Destruction disappeared from Eugene's view. "Son of a bitch," Eugene muttered. Eugene felt intense anger. It was just like the time when he fought against the Spectre. The way this bastard fought like Vermouth despite not being Vermouth infuriated him. It reminded him of his time as Hamel when he had never defeated Vermouth. He had vowed to avenge his past defeats by fighting the real Vermouth someday, so encountering such cursed situations made his stomach turn. It seemed to dilute the joy he would feel when he would eventually defeat Vermouth. "Cut it out," Eugene growled in anger. His instincts warned him. Christina and Anise also shouted Eugene's name in surprise. But Eugene didn't move as before. He stood still with a snarl. "If you evolve using the methods Vermouth would use to attack," he muttered. The divine sword in his hand turned into flames and disintegrated. The distance between them was too short to swing a sword. Divine flames wrapped around Eugene's hands. And then Destruction appeared. It swung the moonlight sword from an even sharper and more lethal angle than before. Then I can easily, Eugene said as he clenched his hands into fists. He punched, his fist wrapped in divine fire. He blocked the moonlight sword that was aimed at his neck with his left arm. The ominous dark power devoured the divine fire and bore into Eugene's forearm. The moment the moonlight sword pierced his arm, his still clenched right fist slammed into Destruction's face. With a loud crash that seemed too intense for a mere punch, Destruction was driven downward. Predict how you're going to move, Eugene muttered while shaking his sore fist. His left arm was deeply cut, though not to the bone, and blood flowed from it unabated. Destruction's dark power hindered his recovery. What if your arm had been severed? Anise shouted angrily. You would have reattached it, Eugene answered. You know that doesn't reattach immediately, said Anise. That's why I hit before it could be severed, retorted Eugene. The sensation of making contact with Destruction was less than what he expected. The colors enveloping Destruction must have dispersed the impact. Eugene clicked his tongue while opening his hand. He had thought pounding Destruction with his fist might suffice, but the effort seemed fruitless compared to the result. Time was against him. Resisting the dark power endlessly wasn't a feasible option. He would be the first to be worn down if the fight dragged on. Eugene glanced back. He saw Molin slicing through the surge of colors and dark power emanating from the heart, with Sienna pouring her magic into the path he opened. Despite the high-powered magical strikes, the heart showed no significant damage. It was to be expected. That had been Destruction's heart for thousands of years, perhaps many times more than that. The dark power accumulated over such an extensive period was deeply embedded and stored in the heart. And you're growing too, Eugene thought with worry. Destruction pushed itself up with both hands from the ground. There was no expression on its face. The cheek where Eugene had struck it showed no swelling or blood. Eugene's lips quivered at the sight. Destruction's attacks were growing explosively stronger with each exchange. But for now he could still handle it. The enemy was fighting with only Vermouth's intelligence and experience. So he needed to outpace its growth with rapid, overwhelming attacks. He needed to make sure Destruction couldn't respond to his attacks. Eugene crouched, preparing ignition with prominence. There are 4 of us, Eugene said. These were the words he hadn't managed to finish earlier. It wasn't just Eugene and the Saints fighting Destruction. During the attack he saw a slight tremor in Destruction's fingertips. It wasn't affecting the combat yet, but there was a tremor in Destruction's movements that seemed unintended. Vermouth, Eugene called out silently. That idiot finally seemed to understand what Eugene and his comrades had been saying. He had told him not to think about dying here today. Don't talk like Destruction's avatar. Don't despise or deny yourself. Fight together. Don't just be swayed, struggle against it. The tremor in Destruction was evidence that Vermouth was struggling. Vermouth was still inside. I can see it, Eugene realized. It wasn't the first time. Unlike before, he wasn't relying on instinct. Eugene immediately leaped and raised divine fire. 2 divine swords appeared in his hands. He had to surpass Destruction's explosive growth rate. He needed to launch attacks so intense that just using Vermouth's intelligence and experience wouldn't be enough to counter them. For a brief moment, Eugene's memory flashed back to past duels with Vermouth. Among them, the attack that had nearly given him the upper hand was Azura Rampage. The 2 divine swords unleashed a flurry of slashes. Open Bookworm and Danthman's Tea Thoughts Chapter 606. The Demon King of Destruction 5. The swords swung at breakneck speed, but paradoxically they seemed to stand still. But that was how they merely appeared to the naked eye. The twin divine swords moved tens, no hundreds of times in an instant, filling the space with their swift cuts. These slashes of the divine swords did not simply vanish after the motion. The flames emitted by the divine swords gave these slashes a distinct form. Therefore they couldn't simply be avoided. Unless the slashes were smashed apart, the flames would only spread and grow. Thus, Destruction was compelled to use the Moonlight Sword. Imbued with dark power, the Moonlight Sword emitted a pale and ominous light. The sword light of Destruction was something familiar to Eugene. Eugene had experienced many defeats throughout his life, and most of them had been at the hands of Vermouth. Each loss prompted Eugene, or rather Hamel, to reflect on why he had been defeated. He pondered how Vermouth had defeated him and how sharp and graceful Vermouth's sword technique was. He thought about the precise moment he lost the pace of the battle that led to his defeat. He remembered it all. Over and over he had visualized these battles in his mind. More recently he had experienced them firsthand. The spectre he fought in Horia had wielded Vermouth's sword techniques after adopting Vermouth's memories. The onslaught of attacks did not cease. Eugene held his breath and poured all his strength into each of his swings. The web of flames intensified and threatened destruction. However, it did not yield and advanced while swinging the moonlight sword. No, it wasn't merely swinging the sword but also utilizing its left hand by enveloping it with dark power and extinguishing Eugene's slashes. Bastard, Eugene cursed inwardly at the unfolding situation. His lips twitched in annoyance as he continued Azura rampage. It was just like the last time he sparred with Vermouth. Of course, Vermouth held a different sword back then and wrapped flames of the white flame formula around his left hand instead of dark power. But apart from that, destruction was currently mirroring Vermouth's response. It's irritating how you mimic him, Eugene thought in annoyance. Imitation. That was all it amounted to. Destruction might possess strength and speed that far surpassed the old Vermouth, but Eugene did not consider destruction superior to Vermouth. It didn't matter how strong or fast it was. What mattered was how one combined and handled such abilities. Could a response that was nothing more than a knee-jerk reflex truly be considered strong? What was so difficult about breaking down and devouring such a simple and brutish attack? So Eugene's face twisted into a grimace. Using Vermouth's body as a vessel and drawing on his experiences and thoughts was destruction's mistake. After all, possessing a human body limited its combat techniques, and Eugene was already overly familiar with the techniques it was utilizing. And Eugene excelled in this kind of personal combat. Even if Vermouth himself came to fight, he would be no match for the current Eugene. Today's destruction was inferior to Vermouth's responses. Growth. If Eugene fought in a way that allowed for its growth, yes, it might be quite a struggle in the future. But that wasn't a problem right now. Eugene did not intend to allow it to grow. He breathed in deeply and exhaled. His heart felt tight. His blood boiled and accelerated. His vision widened. The flames of the twin divine swords blazed intensely. He sliced. He thought only of that. A fierce will transformed into a miracle and embedded itself within the swords. From that moment, destruction could no longer follow the rapid slashes. The moonlight sword was helplessly pushed back by the successive strikes, and the left hand of destruction could no longer suppress the flames. Destruction could no longer advance. Little by little, destruction had no choice but to retreat. It was being forced back. There was no other way. To advance would mean allowing deeper cuts. To stay put would also mean bracing deeper cuts. Thus, retreating was the only option it had. But did that mean it could avoid being cut by retreating? Not necessarily. The slashes persistently pursued destruction. Even though destruction responded the best it could, its dark power and essence were being worn away. Eventually, destruction could no longer wield the moonlight sword properly. It shrank away and switched entirely to defense. But even that was insufficient. Though it desired to block everything, it couldn't. Splurt. The slashes that came from all directions caused dark power to burst like blood. Then both divine swords simultaneously plunged straight ahead. The moonlight sword, set for defense, shattered into pieces. "Do not draw the sword," Eugene whispered between the slashes. Though destruction did not understand the words, Vermouth's reasoning made it clear that one should not draw the sword against such an opponent. It would be no match against its opponent while using the sword. It sensed that it should not draw the sword even with sufficient growth. Thus, destruction hastily raised its dark power. "Don't," Eugene whispered again. Crunch. Eugene's strikes burst through the dark power. The jumbled colors scattered in all directions. Eugene brought his hands together. The two divine swords merged into one great sword. He raised it overhead, then slashed downward. All of the lingering flames tangled like spiderwebs and connected to the divine sword. An inescapable succession of slashes trapped destruction. Whoosh. The magic and its hues were eroded by the flames. Though this wore down Eugene's supply of divine power, he was unconcerned. Destruction's dark power and color were being depleted faster than his divine power. Even in the belly of destruction, he could hear the prayers of the world, hoping for his victory. Thus he was still far off from running low on divine power. Its body wasn't moving. No, it couldn't move his body. The persistent flames clung to the hues, not letting go. No, that was not the only reason. Simply put, the body was not moving as it wished. The muscles involuntarily tensed and the joints were stiff. Give it back. A voice echoed in its head. This is my body. It was the voice of the vessel. It belonged to the avatar that had separated on its own from an ancient wound. I am Vermouth Lionheart. It knew the name. Originally, Destruction was a human with such a name. But now it had no awareness or sentiment left regarding that name. So I'm taking it, Vermouth declared. Crack crackle. Its arms refused to obey its will fully and now, it mobilized with another's will. What had been set for blocking an attack coming from the front moved upwards on its own. Thus, its defenses were left wide open. Crack. The sword plunged into its body and Destruction staggered significantly. Vermouth, Eugene thought, his eyes flickering. Destruction had shown some unusual movement. It was not just a small tremor but a clear movement for Eugene's benefit. It was Vermouth. His resistance and struggles had a definite impact on Destruction. Eugene grinned and pulled the divine sword back. The overlay of the empty sword engulfed the divine sword, the flames fiercely ablaze. Destruction knew instinctively that this sword posed a danger. Flames not yet shaken off still clung to its body and burned. It needed to move. Destruction's gaze shifted. It had realized too late. If it could move as it willed, it could have escaped the flames long ago. But that wasn't an option. It was Vermouth. He was firmly holding onto his own body, preventing it from disappearing. Hamel. A voice came out through forcibly parted lips. Eugene laughed softly, hearing Vermouth's voice. Yes, he answered. The empty sword drew closer to Destruction's body. Rumble. The wave of dark power and colors oxidized with the flames but failed to push Eugene back. The empty sword burnt through all obstructing colors as Eugene gradually approached Destruction. Eventually, the flames of the empty sword completely engulfed Destruction. Rumble. The void trembled. Destruction struggled violently within the blazing flames. Chaotic colors and dark power continued to pour out within the flames, but they were instantly turned to ash and disappeared. Eugene stretched his hand forward while gasping for breath. He clenched his fist and the flames exploded violently. It did not end with one explosion. Eugene continued to unleash eclipses, and with each exploding eclipse, Destruction staggered significantly. Sienna could hear the continuous sounds of explosions from behind her. But she had no leisure to look back. She had to focus all her nerves on attacking the unyielding heart. She struck the heart with magic several times, but the magic barely managed to penetrate into the heart, failing to cause the damage she desired. However, she could gradually see changes in the heart. An irregular creaking mixed into the thumping sound of the heart, and the dark power and colors pouring out were no longer as fierce and resistant as before. Molen also approached the heart. The axe he swung with a scream embedded itself in the heart's surface as if he were chopping wood. Thump, thump, thump. The consecutive axing made the heart quiver and dark power and colors poured out like blood. Now. When the explosion behind them grew louder, a voice came through Mary. It was sudden but Sienna was not startled. The voice belonged to the sage, the world tree Vischer Laviola. Sienna felt the invisible hand of the sage touching her. What did now mean? A bright light filled Sienna's eyes. Her consciousness expanded vastly and allowed her to understand even the things she could not see with her eyes. Vermouth was resisting fiercely. Destruction could no longer control the part it had lost. The divine fire that Eugene continued to unleash was incinerating the part of Destruction that possessed Vermouth, and all of it was putting direct stress on the heart. The dark power and the colors were shaking wildly. Sienna knew what she had to do with her magic now. She knew what it could do. She pointed Mary at the heart of Destruction. Is this the final destination of my desire? The sage asked with a chuckle through Mary. The wish to see the end of Destruction had finally come to fruition today. The power of the world tree flowed into Mary from the distant great forest. Whoosh! Mary's vines stretched out like a bow. Sienna strung the strings of soul power between the vines. Crack! The spirits of the world tree that came through Mary gathered together, and Sienna's soul power bound them together to form an arrow. Molen felt a spine-tingling thrill. He did not look back. Like Sienna, Molen also knew what he had to do now. He knew what he could do. Arg! With a ferocious scream, he raised his axe up high. Though it was not enlarged, the axe was focused with the same force that had opened a path to the heart of destruction. Rumble! Waves of dark power and colors poured out, but Molan did not unleash his attack to counter destruction's attack. Molan still held the axe high and made the choice to endure the attack with his bare body. It was not yet time to swing. The bowstring was released. A green light pierced through the void and rushed toward the heart. Then finally Molan brought his axe down. The resisting colors and dark power were forcefully driven downward by the relentless power contained in the axe. Crack! The axe created a large gash in the outer wall of the heart before shattering. The arrow Sienna released was shot into that wound. Spirits of the World Tree, released along with soul power, burrowed into the heart. Ha! The laughter of the sage led the spirits. The heart swelled as if it were about to burst, and its throbbing turned into a tearing scream. Aoff! A genuine scream burst forth. Still not freed from the explosions of eclipse, destruction clutched its head and rolled on the ground. The voice belonged to Vermouth, but the screams of pain were not his own. It was destruction possessing his body that was reacting to the pain. Even so, Eugene did not like hearing a scream that Vermouth would never utter in his voice. He reached out his hand toward destruction to stop it from screaming. But he withdrew his hand. Despite the screaming, he could see that its eyes were calm. He could faintly discern the focus in its eyes. The eyes were cloudy and faded in color, but still there was a flame burning deep within them. Yes, someone said as if in understanding. Eugene also nodded silently. The divine fire burning destruction dissipated completely. Destruction sprang up as if it had been waiting for this. However, it did not attack Eugene. Instead, it moved towards the swollen heart. Sienna naturally tried to intercept it but flinched and withdrew her magic. Molan also refrained from swinging his axe anymore, hastily stepping back because he sensed Eugene's intent. "I think it's a mistake," the Demon King of Incarceration said, shaking his head while watching the battle from a distance. Destruction's instincts have not abandoned Vermouth Lionheart. That shows how significant Vermouth is to the Demon King of Destruction. "That might be so," answered Eugene. "If you had continued attacking, you could have inflicted wounds even the Demon King of Destruction couldn't ignore," said Incarceration. "If Vermouth had been killed, that is," Eugene challenged Incarceration's words. The Demon King of Incarceration grimaced at the response. "You must have seen some potential in Vermouth. But in the end, that's all it is, potential. As much as Vermouth might wish otherwise, once swallowed up like that, he will no longer be able to resist." The Demon King of Incarceration pointed to the heart. Vermouth's body was being sucked into the heart after reaching it. "Well," Eugene scoffed as he stared at the heart, which was undergoing transformation. The dark power that spilled out from it wrapped colors around it and touched the ground. Crack crackle. Flesh and bones extracted from the heart turned into grotesque limbs. "Look, Hamel," the Demon King of Incarceration said with a sigh. "Do you really think you can kill that monster?" The monster centered around the heart raised its head. Chapter 607. The Demon King of Destruction 6. Eugene naturally tried to recall any beast or monster that resembled the creature before him. It had a massive body and a wide-open mouth revealing dense, sharp teeth. Its limbs sprouted irregularly and touched the ground. Some nails and claws curved like hooks, while others jutted out like knives. There were further additional limbs sprouting randomly on its back as well as wings. Try as he might, Eugene couldn't think of any monsters like the one in front of him. While individual parts might resemble something familiar to him, no beast or monster was similar in appearance to the one standing in front of him. It was a monster formed on its own, but it was fundamentally different from a chimera. In other words, it wasn't a forced union of different things. Rather, it was a creature in its own right. A monster shaped from dark and dreadful power. Eugene felt a chill run down his spine as he clenched his fist. Most of the demon kings or similar beings Eugene had faced looked somewhat human, but this one did not. But it was precisely because of that Eugene could strongly sense that what he faced was suited to be called a demon king. Should I say it's an efficient form, free of waste? Eugene wondered in amazement. This was the being that had brought about the end of the world several times, and as such, Eugene could sense evil dark power that was suited for the destroyer of the world, emanating fully from this monster. They were inside the belly of destruction, but what they faced now could truly be called the essence of destruction. Eugene was certain of one thing as he clenched his sweat-soaked hands. Killing this creature meant killing the Demon King of Destruction. "Stop spouting nonsense and think of helping, okay?" Eugene asked. "Help?" The Demon King of Incarceration shrugged, showing his frayed hands. "I've burnt up my life keeping destruction at bay until you arrived. Isn't that enough?" "It's just a life on the highway for death anyway," retorted Eugene. "Ha. I do welcome death, but to openly say such a thing is truly shameless," the Demon King of Incarceration said, shaking his head and chuckling dryly. "Unfortunately, I can't be of any help in this fight. My dark power was depleted long ago. I have nothing left to draw upon." "I'm not asking for help in battle," said Eugene. The Demon King of Incarceration blinked several times in response to the earnest gaze directed at him. "Haha." Soon the Demon King of Incarceration burst out laughing. This time the laughter was not hollow. He laughed genuinely. He felt surprise and delight at Eugene's words. "Indeed, Eugene Lionheart," he said, still chuckling. Without wasting any more time gazing at the Demon King of Incarceration, Eugene turned his head. He considered the emotions mixed in that laughter a sufficient response. Besides, he no longer had the luxury of conversing with the Demon King of Incarceration. The massive mouth of the monster had opened wide towards him. "You're a remarkable glutton," the Demon King of Incarceration murmured from behind. As Eugene thought, there was a definitive answer mixed in the laughter. Eugene smirked and raised his hand. With a whoosh, a gigantic divine sword appeared. The Demon King of Incarceration slowly dragged his feet backward, though they barely moved according to his will. His body was destined for death. He wanted to witness the end of this battle before dying, but if the situation demanded, though he might not see the end, he thought it wouldn't be bad to devote his last moments to the future. His stores of dark power had been long depleted. He wasn't able to fight any longer. That was the truth. Yet the soul of the great Demon King, having lived through the ages, possessed a will strong enough to push back the dark power of destruction for one fleeting moment, if need be, if he had to. The Demon King of Incarceration was willing to let himself burn for the sake of taking destruction down. But now that was no longer possible. Dying that way could provide a fine self-satisfaction, but it wouldn't meet Eugene's ambitious expectations. "Do you truly want to create a miracle?" the Demon King of Incarceration asked with a chuckle and lifted his head. "A miracle?" He laughed again at the word he had muttered. The term seemed almost quaint. Everything up to now and this moment here was the miracle Eugene Lionheart had wrought. What the Demon King of Incarceration had to observe until the end was whether all these miracles could culminate into a myth. "I can feel it," Eugene thought to himself. His heart was racing, painfully so. His senses were so heightened he could feel every flow of his heated blood. Eugene steadied his breath and fixed his gaze on the monster. Its enormous maw seemed capable of swallowing entire cities and was agape. Yet, despite its vast openness, the inside remained obscured, housing nothing but impenetrable pitch-black darkness. Destruction's dark power was bubbling furiously within. The blood knows, Eugene thought earnestly. Waves of boiling dark power rippled and leaked out of the gaping maw. Countless teeth were coated with the dark power. Eugene sensed the emanating tension from Sienna and Molin as they drew closer. Anise and Christina, too, had forgotten their prayers in front of the overwhelming monster. "Vermouth," Eugene called out inwardly. The blood of the Lionhearts flowed in his veins. It remained undiluted even after 300 years. This body was a descendant of Vermouth. Though it did not contain dark power, the blood of the Lionhearts originated from the Demon King of Destruction. That was why Eugene could feel it so intensely now. The boiling blood informed him. It informed him that Vermouth was inside the heart at the center of the monster. He had been sucked into the heart but had not lost consciousness. Eugene could have blocked him from being dragged in if he had wanted, but he had let him go because that was Vermouth's wish. Vermouth had escaped despair. He had not given up on life, deciding to die with destruction. Just as Eugene and his companions had hoped, Vermouth Lionheart had decided to fight as himself, not as a mere fragment of destruction. Even now, Vermouth was awakening and resisting at the center of that dreadful and ominous dark power. "You should have done that earlier," Eugene muttered. Despite standing in front of the monster's vast, gaping maw, there was a smirk on his face. The overflowing dark power was converging into a single point, but Eugene's eyes were fixed straight at its center. Although it appeared to be impenetrable darkness, a tiny spark could be seen in its midst. The tiny spark was burning brightly. The monster unleashed the dark power from its maw. The clumps of dark power rushed forward, and it felt as if thousands of dragons had unleashed their breath simultaneously. No, even that seemed trivial in comparison. Eugene could no longer gaze at the spark. He swallowed his breath and clutched his divine sword tightly. "Light," he whispered softly. The light seated far across the sea rose up. All the divine power amassed in anticipation of this very day was now linked to Eugene. It was so immense it could shake even his spirit, but the prayers of the two saints made this boundless power more malleable and available. Levantian was imbued into the divine sword. The burning flames swelled massively along with the light. Rumble. The divine sword cleaved through the dark power, but it could not incinerate all the severed fragments of it. The remaining, unburned dark power was drawn back into the monster and recycled. "Time is not on our side. You know that, right?" Sienna stated briskly. Eugene nodded as he passed the divine sword to Molan. "Even breathing here is lethal," she said. Not that going outside would improve their situation. Attacking from within destruction's heart allowed them direct strikes at the heart, but if they fled outside, it would be extremely difficult to reach the heart once more. "The fight with a demon king has always been like this. We just need to kill it before we die," Molan muttered gruffly while transforming the divine sword into an axe. Boom. With its countless limbs scraping the floor, the monster advanced towards them. Eugene eyed its many limbs that were reminiscent of a centipede before speaking up. "Molan, cut off those bastards' limbs. If possible, slice through the torso as well." "Yeah," he answered. "Sienna, aim for its back. Stop it from circulating its dark power," instructed Eugene. "Easier said than done," Sienna responded. Unlike Molan, who nodded solemnly, Sienna grimaced and grumbled. Despite her words, she immediately soared upwards. "What about you, Hamel?" Molan asked while crouching low with the axe in both hands. Gripping a divine sword in each hand, Eugene replied, "I'll rip that bastard's mouth apart." Sienna had voiced her concerns and Eugene had also acknowledged them. He was keenly aware that the fight wouldn't be easy. The oppressive aura from the giant monster was even more formidable than that of the Demon King of Incarceration. But Eugene had defeated the Demon King of Incarceration, so he was not overwhelmed by the Demon King of Destruction. But just not being overwhelmed didn't mean he could take its power lightly. Everyone, Eugene, Molan, Sienna, Anise and Christina, knew they couldn't underestimate destruction. Yet no one hesitated. They all advanced towards the monster. There was nowhere else to retreat and they just needed to bring it down. That was reason enough to stand against destruction. The same was true outside. Many people had died. As many of the Nur had fallen as the dead allies, yet it had little impact on the battle's progress. The enemy relied solely on swarm tactics and was not swayed by morale. "Block them!" Lovelian shouted in front of a giant gate suspended in the sky. Pantheon was fully opened and had already unleashed all its summoned creatures, yet the front line was still being pushed back. They had to stop it. If the endlessly pouring waves of Nur finally eroded the divine army's ranks and the concepts of front and rear lines lost their meaning on this battlefield, then a wanton massacre would begin. "We can hold them off, but for how long?" Lovelian wondered as he took a deep breath and fixed his gaze on the front line. An army like none other in history had gathered here. They faced the last demon king humanity had not conquered, a demon king who had brought about the end of the world multiple times. Those gathered here were individuals wanting to leave their names in history, legend, and myth. They were enchanted by the noble cause of saving the world. Despite the overwhelming enemy numbers, there was still faith in their eyes. It was because the divine sun shining brightly in the sky did not let them feel fear. Even as allies fell dead beside them, even as the teeth and claws of unknown monsters pierced them, everyone bellowed while marching forward. From the outset, retreat wasn't an option even if they wanted to. The exact details weren't known to the divine army, but everyone who had witnessed the demon king of destruction instinctively understood one thing. If they didn't bring down destruction, everything would be over. "Fire punch!" shouted Malkith. She swung her fists wildly after taking on a giant form using Omega Force. She would become the arch-wizard who saved the world against destruction. Melkith reveled in that glory. Balzac Ludbeth had become a legend by betraying the demon king of incarceration and delivering him a fatal blow, but Melkith was confident that the renown she would achieve today would surpass even that. This was the center of mythology. If she survived today, she would become an eternal legend, the greatest arch-wizard of all time. There would be no other arch-wizard greater than Melkith El-Haya in the future or for eternity. Thunderbolt kick, she yelled. The monsters known as Nur kept pouring out endlessly, swarming toward Melkith. She had faced them before in Horia. Melkith possessed overwhelming firepower, and the Nur were no more than moths drawn to the flame. But even so, if enough moths flew into the fire, they could eventually snuff it out. Melkith bit her lip nervously. The oxidation of mana is troubling, she thought in concern. She burned, crushed, and tore apart the Nur that clung to her, killing them all. In the process, the scattered dark power burned through Melkith's mana and disrupted her resonance with the spirits. She could withstand it for now, but if this continued, she wouldn't be able to maintain Omega Force for much longer. This is poison, Melkith thought. The fumes of dark power released by the dead Nur were spreading like a miasma. The more corpses piled up, the stronger the toxic energy would become. Melkith glanced up at the sky, wondering, if I get farther from the ground, could I avoid the poison? Or, near the sun, Rhaenyra and the battleships unleashed their breath attacks and bombardments. Raphael's airborne forces were steadily advancing while fending off the Nur. Melkith swallowed hard and clenched her fists. Her destination wasn't the sky but ahead, the source of these grotesque monsters. That was where the Demon King of Destruction was standing. She attacked that unmoving, mysterious mass of colors. The thought crossed her mind, but realizing it wasn't easy. Though they had come here under the noble pretext of saving the world, charging directly at the Demon King who had brought about the end of the world countless times was not something one could do without extraordinary resolve. But just as she was trying to steel herself to move forward, Melkith's eyes widened in surprise. Above the tightly packed heads of the Nuz, areas of darkness began to manifest repeatedly. It was the power of the Demon Eye of Darkness. Seal was using the Demon Eye in succession to close in on the Demon King of Destruction. No! Cried Melkith. Seal wasn't the only one traversing the darkness. Carmen led the elite forces of the Lionhearts as they approached destruction. I'm coming too. Melkith screamed in determination as she ran across the Nuz bodies. Blood, said Carmen. She stood at the forefront and clutched her chest as she glared at the Demon King of Destruction. This blood, born of evil, seeks justice, Carmen announced. It was a cryptic statement, but every member of the Lionheart clan who stood before destruction felt the same pounding in their hearts as Carmen. Inside that monstrosity was Eugene Lionheart. And alongside him, the progenitor of the Lionhearts, Vermouth Lionheart. Flames engulfed Carmen's heaven genocide. This strike wouldn't be enough to deliver a fatal blow to the Demon King of Destruction. It might not even qualify as a proper attack, let alone leave a scratch. Even so, Carmen threw her punch at destruction. She struck, ensuring the blow would resonate deep within the twisted mass of colors. Chapter 608. The Demon King of Destruction 7. What? Alcester was leading the White Dragon Knights, and he looked towards the Demon King of Destruction, exclaiming in shock. Carmen's strike had reached and dissipated against the Demon King of Destruction, but it had created a very small ripple in the tangled mass of colors. Did it connect? Alcester thought as his eyes widened at the sight. It was only a week ago that he had witnessed how terrifyingly powerful and ominously strong the Demon King of Destruction was. It had appeared suddenly, instantly nullifying Melkith El-Haya's Omega Force, and had remained unscathed despite hundreds of priests sacrificing their lives to attack it. But look at it now. Carmen's strike had definitely reached the Demon King of Destruction. It had created a tiny ripple in that bizarre entanglement of colors. It was entirely possible that Carmen Lionheart had grown stronger in this last week. Eugene Lionheart's divinity was growing, and his anointed holy knights were receiving his power. But more than that, Carmen had managed to cause damage to destruction because its current state was imperfect, at least more so than when it first appeared a week ago. Alcester understood why. Heroes who had ventured directly into the belly of the Demon King of Destruction were fighting within. Because of their struggle, The Demon King of Destruction was remaining stationary and had become vulnerable enough to be affected by outside attacks. "Captain!" Alchester's lieutenant shouted after noticing the situation. The White Dragon Knights were always mentioned among the strongest in the continent. But today they were struggling just to hold the line against the relentless, undeterred horde of monsters. It was only because Alchester stood at the forefront that the White Dragon Knights were able to push the front line forward at all. If Alchester were to leave, the tide of battle would change immediately. But all the members of the White Dragon Knights looked at him with fearless eyes. They urged Alchester forward with their glances. Even if Alchester were a superhuman, wielding his sword relentlessly against the endless army would eventually wear him out. Therefore it seemed best to strike directly at the cradle of the monster known as Destruction while he still had the strength, even if it meant that he and many of his comrades might die in the process. Alchester felt a resolute determination in the eyes of his subordinates. It wasn't just the White Dragon Knights who were exceptional. Everyone on this battlefield was filled with a resolve to die for the greater good. They thought of the radiant name of the hero, a man who had reincarnated after hundreds of years and ultimately ascended to divinity. Everyone here knew the name of Eugene Lionheart and the tales of the heroes from 300 years ago. They had even defeated the Demon King of Incarceration who had once defeated these heroes. And now they were challenging the Demon King of Destruction, whom no one had ever been able to stand against. Everyone on this battlefield was captivated by that myth. They wanted to witness its completion and contribute to its fulfillment. "Yes," Alchester replied. He felt the same. He was born into a family of knights that served the royal family of the Kiel Empire. He had long ago sworn to dedicate his life as a knight to the royal cause. But how many times had he longed for this? Ever since meeting Eugene, ever since hearing his stories time and again, he had committed himself. Even before knowing that Eugene was the reincarnation of Hamel, their encounter had ignited a flicker of flame in Alchester's heart. He had a desire to dedicate his sword to that young hero, a desire to fight alongside him against the Demon King and save the world. Not just as a knight but as Alchester Dragonic, the man he had always yearned for this. Now was the time to consume himself with that desire. Alchester leaped upward from the ground. With a whoosh, his massive form of the empty sword cleanly bisected the necks of the Nuz in one sweep. Under the blazing arc of his sword, dozens of the monsters' heads and their grisly blood rained down like a downpour. Alchester stepped on the severed heads and leaped forward again. "Little Alchester," Carmen said as she glanced back and chuckled. Her hands were bloody and tattered as she spoke. "This place is where we settle the debts of the blood that runs through the Lionhearts. An outsider like you doesn't necessarily need to help. I personally taught Sir Eugene how to wield a sword technique," Alchester replied with a smile. "I can't claim to have taught him anything else, but the art of the empty sword, a secret of my family, was indeed passed on to Sir Eugene by me. Though I do not carry the blood of the Lionhearts, serving here for Sir Eugene, I believe I am more than qualified to do so." "Your son is still young," Carmen reminded him. "The kid once called Little has grown enough to have a son of his own. If I cannot be a proud father, my son might not get the chance to become an adult," responded Alchester. He felt a burning sensation in his chest. The Demon King of Destruction remained silent and did not strike back. Carmen's arm was tattered because it was harmed by the natural backlash of dark power when she struck Destruction. Even if it didn't move, dark power surrounded Destruction, and its reactive force alone could cause injury to the body. Not the time for flair, is it?" said Carmen. She pulled out a cigar and put it in her mouth. As always, she didn't light it, but the cigar soaked in flowing blood tasted of the acrid blood and the musty dampness of the tobacco leaves. "Help us," she asked. She turned her head to look at the Demon King of Destruction. Rumble. Gilead, Guilford and Guion wielded their swords and carved through the chaotic colors of destruction. But swinging a single strike left their flames scattered, and blood spurted from their mouths. "The heroes who made this world what it is are in there," said Carmen. She clenched her bloody hand into a fist. "The progenitor of the Lionhearts, the Great Vermouth, is also in there." There was no need for further words. A colossal form of the empty sword surged from Alchester's blade. Carmen silently watched Alchester's back as he charged toward the Demon King of Destruction, letting out a chuckle. "The kid has grown up quite a bit," Carmen chuckled, reminiscing about the past. Alchester as a little boy swinging a wooden sword. That small child had become the commander of a nation's knightly order, and enough time had passed for him to have a son. The heroes who gifted them that time were inside destruction, and just like in the distant past, they were fighting to give the world a future. The world couldn't simply rely on them alone, Carmen thought as she turned her head. Did everyone share the same desire and resolve? She saw people headed this way across the battlefield. They were not the heroes from 300 years ago, but those from this era, people who could certainly be called heroes in the future. There must be meaning in all this, said Carmen. There will be, said Gilead, wiping the blood from his mouth as he approached Carmen. It was brief, but at the moment the sword pierced through, I felt my blood being drawn. And the light too, Guillaume gasped for breath as he spoke. I think I wouldn't mind dying here, Carmen said with a nod. But I believe that our ancestors, and our comrades should never die. I wish for the same, said Guillaume. Having suffered all their lives, shouldn't they all live to see happiness? Guillaume chuckled wryly and turned his head, looking at Guilford, who seemed about to collapse any moment, spitting blood. My second brother has indulged in too much happiness. Just one swing of the sword and look at him, he commented. I've retired, Guilford responded. To think you retired at your prime even if you were moved to a collateral line. You got complacent with your happiness and neglected your sword, didn't you? Guillaume asked. You're too harsh to the one who, for the sake of our family, took up his sword in a dire moment though he had laid it down long ago. Guilford protested in hurt and indignation. Carmen smacked his back and stepped forward. If you have the energy to talk, use it to engage the white flame formula. An attack of flames, lightning, storm and earthquakes struck the demon king of destruction alongside a shrieking roar. Carmen frowned as she watched the violently shaking colors. We receive help for a great cause, but inside there is the ancestor of Lionheart. And there is also his descendant, the glorious and honorable Eugene Lionheart, along with Lady Sienna, who might as well be his wife, and Saint Christina, said Carmen. The great ancestor is there too, said Gilead. Yes. They are all the blood of the Lionheart, Carmen nodded vigorously before raising her fist. This battle was for the world, but it was also for the Lionheart clan and its kin. Carmen thought of her ancestor who had suffered for 300 years. At the moment he was freed from his last bonds, if at that moment the sound he heard was that of the uncultured woman screaming. The mere thought was horrifying and guilt-inducing. Carmen shook off the pain and swung her fist once more. Eugene felt a resonance. It wasn't earth-shattering, but his senses clearly felt the subtle vibrations. At first he thought it was vermouth. Could it be that vermouth was resisting inside the monster's heart, causing the void filling this place to waver? But soon after he realized it wasn't coming from within. The vibration had come from outside. Damn it, Eugene cursed as he pushed himself up from the ground. He tried to stand but staggered instantly, for a simple reason. His left leg was missing. He had thought he dodged well, but apparently not well enough. Eugene examined his leg, which neither bled nor caused pain, and scowled. Hamel. Sir Eugene, your leg. Don't make a fuss, Eugene said, jumping forward on his remaining leg. If it had been an arm it would be a problem, but a leg is actually okay. I don't need it to kick. I can just fly to move around. He had arrived at that conclusion through cold reasoning. The loss of his leg had no impact on the current fight. The severed leg couldn't be regenerated immediately, but it would fully heal during recovery after everything was over. Fortunately, there was no pain and no bleeding. Dark power wasn't seeping into him through the wound either. And though it might sound odd, fortunately the leg was severed very cleanly. He hadn't been careless. He just hadn't dodged properly. Eugene levitated at a low altitude and narrowed his eyes to glare at the monster. Molin's axe had chopped off several of the monster's many limbs. The hands that flailed from its back were bombarded by Sienna's magic. Eugene also crushed the giant maw's teeth, burst its eyeballs and hacked at its face. Despite their relentless assault, it didn't feel like they were pushing it back. The more they attacked, the more they chipped away at its color and dark power, but it equally drained their strength too. They could no longer overestimate their regenerative abilities, but the monster was not limited in that regard. No matter how much it was cut, it quickly regenerated. But they hadn't given up. If their attacks were too shallow and it regenerated, Eugene thought they just needed to strike deeper and heavier. Then the monster's stance changed. The swirling colors suddenly stopped in place and its dark power quietly settled. And then it exploded. That was it. Are you okay? Eugene asked as Molan was just getting up. Not really. Molan's response was unexpectedly straightforward. His left arm had been severed from the shoulder. He had sacrificed his arm to block the scattering dark power and colors. I can still fight. Molan rotated his right arm a few times to demonstrate. I saw it, commented Sienna. She had returned after being blown away and was catching her breath. There were no injuries on her body, but many of Mary's petals had turned to ash and crumbled. I'll need to formulate new spells. That last attack won't work on us anymore, she said. How many times can you block it? Asked Eugene. I don't know. I'll do what I can, answered Sienna. I'll assist, Anise chimed in. Light stretched from Eugene and connected to Sienna. She received the additional divine power and felt Anise's presence. It's not giving us a break, is it? Eugene grumbled as he lifted his head. He had impaled the monster with a huge divine sword, but it was slowly rising to its feet. Just before his leg was severed, he had driven the divine sword in, but it had disintegrated by the flaring, exploding colors. Slowly the creature's mouth opened and dark power boiled within. Hundreds of hands on its back swayed and then all shot up into the air. Boom boom boom. Each hand manifested a condensed orb of dark power. The sight of thousands, tens of thousands of attacks aiming their way made Sienna's face stiffen. What about that? Can you block it? Eugene asked with a hollow laugh. Sienna half opened her mouth and then fell silent. Anise too was at a loss for words. Both were briefly pondering how to combine barriers to fend off this merciless assault. Try to avoid it as much as possible, Sienna stuttered out a response. Molan ground his teeth and stepped forward to shield them. If the worst came to pass, he was prepared to end it with his sacrifice. I can't see what's in front of me, so get lost, Eugene cursed as he stood next to Molan. With a haunting moan, dark power and color flowed out of the monster's maw. Eugene gripped a divine sword in each hand and glared at the beast. It was already clear that moving out of range was impossible. As soon as the attack started, he would open a path based on instinct and intuition. The anomaly occurred suddenly. The monster's massive body staggered, and the orbs of dark power held in the hands on its back scattered. It staggered and scattered its power, but that didn't mean the attack hadn't started. However, those tens of thousands of attacks were not aimed at Eugene and his group but shot off randomly into the sky and elsewhere. What the? Sienna screamed, taken aback. Though the attacks seemed randomly fired given their sheer number, some were heading their way. And still a powerful tide of dark power was boiling inside that gaping maw. Boom. With a roar, the monster's mouth snapped shut. The buildup of dark power in its mouth backfired, blowing off the monster's head cleanly. Eugene too was shocked, his eyes wide. Its head had been blown off, but the attack originated from the monster's own dark power. A new head burst forth right next to where the original had been. The creature roared loudly for the first time, emitting immense fury. It seemed the recent anomaly hadn't been part of the monster's plan. Bastard, Eugene cursed with a grin, deflecting the oncoming rush of colors with his two divine swords. Vermouth was coming,